You are listening to Right Off the Bus.
All right, so our next guest on Right Off the Bus on our Under the Radar segment is Jeff Lemieux, who is a senior writer and editor for Pat and I's favorite MLS team, the New England Revolution. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on today to talk a little bit about what you do, a little bit about the Revs and the MLS in general.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, looking forward to this conversation for sure. You know, we are two lifelong Revs fans, so definitely excited to dive into it. So just to start off, Jeff, can you talk about what you do for the Revs as a senior staff writer and editor, from writing for the website to hosting the interviews on YouTube and everything else involved that you do?
Yeah, so I kind of describe myself when people ask what my role is with the Revs as sort of an in-house reporter. Obviously, it's a little more complex than that, but generally, those are kind of the responsibilities of the position. Is you kind of think of how somebody would cover the team as a reporter, and we do a lot of that just from within the organization. So a lot of interviews with the players, on-camera hosting, written stories. We host a podcast. So all of the type of content that you would imagine, a media outlet would produce about the New England Revolution, that's what we're doing, but we're doing it from within the organization. So we get a little bit of a different perspective. We get a little bit of different access because we're in the building all day, every day. We're traveling with the team. We're on the road with the team. So we do try to provide a bit more of that kind of behind the scenes access. But basically any content that you see produced on revolutionsoccer.net or that goes out through the Revolution social channels, whether it be a written story or a podcast or an on-camera video interview, that's all coming through our digital department, which I play a role in.
Awesome. And you've been with the Revolution for quite some time now in that variety of different roles. Can you talk about working your way up through the Revs over the years and to where you manage your own team?
Yeah, so it's funny you guys mentioned you're lifelong Revs fans. I'm a lifelong Revs fan as well. Maybe not quite as lifelong because I think I'm a little bit older. So the Revs weren't a team until I was 11. But from the time the Revs came into existence when I was 11, I grew up in Massachusetts, about an hour and a half away from Foxborough. So I became a massive Revolution fan back in their inaugural season in 1996. And I always knew I wanted to get into sports and work in sports. And coming out of Ithaca College with a sports information and communications major, I was looking to get into sports writing or sports PR. And I ended up working in the athletics department at MIT for a couple of years, just covering a variety of different sports there, writing game recaps about water polo and rifle and gymnastics and all of these various different sports, getting this experience. And after a couple of years at MIT, the job the job description just came through a coworker of mine's email. She forwarded it along to me, knowing that I was a Revolution fan, that I might be interested in working with the Revs. I applied, ended up getting the job, which I was not expecting. And I worked for 2 years in PR with the Revolution to start. I was a communications coordinator. So I was much more behind the scenes, writing press releases, writing your PR style game recaps, creating game notes, setting up interviews. And it was kind of by chance that I ended up in the digital realm in 2010. So going into my third season with the Revs, we didn't really have a digital department at that time. Teams weren't producing a lot of their own in-house content. That was kind of the time when teams started to move in that direction a little bit. So 2010, we decided to create our own digital department. It was just going to be a little 2-person department, basically a manager / videographer, and then a staff writer and online host. And I was part of the group of people who was hiring that position. I was going to stay in PR, and I was helping try to find a staff writer and online host for the club. And we went into the 2010 Super Draft, and we hadn't hired a staff writer and online host yet. So I kind of stepped into that role at the draft just to help out, conducted some on-camera interviews with our GM, our head coach, our draftees on the draft floor. And we came out of the draft, and I think both me and our digital manager who was hiring the position, we kind of looked at each other, and I was like, I kind of enjoyed that. And he was like, I think you were all right with it. Like, do you want to do it? So that's how I got into the digital side of it from PR, was just by chance. We didn't have anybody to do it at the 2010 draft, so I did it, enjoyed it, and kind of just slid into the digital side. And it's been a progression since there. This will be my 12th season in digital, 14th with the Revs overall, 12th in digital. And our digital department has just expanded rapidly since then, as I think digital departments have expanded in every professional sports club since then. So, we went from that initial department of a manager / videographer and a writer to we now have our director, who was the manager at the time. He is now our director. We've got 2 full-time videographers, 2 full-time on-camera hosts and writers. We have a full-time social media position, an email marketing coordinator who does graphic design. We're now like a 7-person department. So it has just continued to expand. And I've continued to take on kind of a greater role as the years have rolled on. And it's been a lot of years.
That's awesome that you've been with the team for such a long time, and you've clearly been able to adapt to a lot of different roles, and you seem like you're having a great time doing it. I mean, can you talk about seeing the league, the MLS, grow a little bit as you have been with the Revs for so long? Can you talk about that exponential growth that we've seen with the league in general?
It's kind of crazy to even think back to what the league looked like when I started in 2008, because being in the league for the past 14 years, it has happened rapidly, but gradually enough over those 14 years that it's not like you snap your fingers and I've noticed the growth. It happened gradually over the course of those 14 years for me. But when I think of what this league looked like in 2008, I think it was a 12-team league at the time. Maybe 2 or 3 teams were playing in their own stadiums. Columbus, LA, Chicago. Those were maybe the only 3 teams that were playing in their own soccer-specific stadiums when I started in this league. Over the course of the past 14 years, the league has not only doubled in size in terms of teams. More than half the teams that are in the league right now did not exist when I started in Major League Soccer. Almost every team, unfortunately, does not include the New England Revolution, but we're looking to get there, has a soccer-specific stadium at this point. And it has just gone from kind of this fringe league trying to find its footing and trying to find its voice to, I think, finding that voice and kind of understanding what it is a little bit. And it doesn't seem like it's going to stop growing anytime soon. It feels like it has been on an upward trajectory for a while now, and it feels like that upward trajectory is just going to continue.
Well, we do hope that the Revs get their own stadium. Maybe that'll help their growth out.
As do I.
Well, Jeff, you mentioned you attended Ithaca College up in New York. That's actually where my brother graduated as well. And even though you're originally from the Cape, did you know at that time going to Ithaca that you were going to go into sports journalism and that was a career path you were headed towards?
I did, yeah. So, growing up, I knew I wanted to be involved in sports, but I think like most people who eventually get involved in sports broadcasting, I wanted to be a professional athlete when I was a kid. That's what I wanted to do, was to play pro sports. But you eventually you come to that realization at some point that maybe playing professional sports isn't going to be the path for me. You probably get to, freshman, sophomore year in high school, and you're like, if I was going to be a pro, maybe I would have been on a little bit of a better path right now. So at that point, the thought process changes a little bit to, well, how can I stay involved in sports if I'm not going to be a professional athlete? And I knew I enjoyed writing. I always tell this story about kind of like, when did you know you wanted to get into sports writing and sports broadcasting? This is a true story. I literally used to play FIFA growing up, and I would play a game of FIFA with a pen and notepad next to me, and I would take notes throughout the course of the game: who scored, when they scored, how the goal was scored, the kind of the story of the game. And then I would write a game recap after the game about the FIFA game that I just played. And I just did that for fun because I liked telling the story of the game. So when you do something like that, you're like, maybe this is something maybe there's a career there for me. Maybe I could do this as a career. So when I was looking at colleges, I think there were 3 colleges in the country at the time, because this was way back in the olden days in 2001 when I was looking at colleges. And I remember looking at Bowling Green, I think UMass Amherst, and Ithaca were 3 of the only schools in the country that had specific sports journalism programs. Anywhere else you went, you could go into sports management, or you could go into journalism. You could be an English major. But only a few schools in the country were actually focused on sports communications and sports journalism. And Ithaca was one of those schools. So I actually went on a visit to Ithaca my junior year in high school, and I didn't really like the campus. I wasn't a huge fan when I went on the school visit, but I knew that I wanted to work in sports journalism so badly, and I knew that Ithaca was going to put me on that path enough that I said, this is probably more so my parents. My parents would say they were the ones who pushed me towards Ithaca and said, look, if you want to be a sports journalist, this is where you got to go. So I kind of begrudgingly went to Ithaca knowing that that was what was going to be right for me in terms of getting into sports broadcasting. And once I actually got to Ithaca, I absolutely loved my 4-year experience at Ithaca. Loved the campus, loved the school, loved the area, and up in central New York, out in the middle of nowhere. So it really worked out, but it was definitely the academics and the knowledge that I wanted to get into sports broadcasting that sent me to Ithaca. Otherwise, based on the visit that I had there when I was in high school, I probably wouldn't have ended up there.
I was just going to say, sounds like me when I took my tour at Westfield, rainy, thunder. I was the only person on the tour, and I'm like, how did I end up choosing to go here? This makes no sense. And then I had a great experience, so I can definitely relate there.
Well, so the funny thing is when I visited Ithaca, it was like this gorgeous, beautiful summer day. Everybody was out on the quads, hanging out, and it was like the typical. You would have assumed it was like the typical college experience, and it's complete opposite of what Ithaca, New York is actually like. It snows from like September to April. It's cold. You're right on the lake, so it's windy. So it should have actually driven me to go there. I think what I didn't like when I initially visited was it is kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's Ithaca, which is this fantastic college town with like 30,000 college kids, because you've got Ithaca College and Cornell, and there's basically nothing else there. It's just a big college town. But for like an hour in every direction, there's nothing. Until you hit Syracuse, you're not going to see much of anything. So I think that was what was driving me away from it. But despite Ithaca being a cold, barren winter wasteland, it was a fantastic college experience.
And was soccer your sport of choice always? I know you mentioned you always played FIFA and wrote down notes, but was that the one that you played too? You said you wanted to play professionally at a young age, anyways.
Growing up, I played soccer, baseball, and basketball. I was never all that serious with basketball. I'm still only 5'7" right now, so basketball was probably never going to be a serious endeavor for me. Baseball, I played pretty seriously up until about freshman year in high school, and that's when I felt I could kind of feel myself starting to gravitate towards soccer a little bit. And eventually, I played baseball and soccer through sophomore year in high school, and at that point is when I moved to year-round. I'd play indoor soccer, summer soccer, fall soccer. I basically at that point was like, soccer is the direction I want to go, and started playing year-round and dropped baseball at that point. But probably up until about freshman year in high school, soccer and baseball were sort of neck and neck. But I think, honestly, it was the 94 World Cup initially kind of got me into soccer. The 98 World Cup is really what just kind of ingrained the soccer culture in me. When you see what the game means on the international level, and the people in the stands, and all of the different cultures and sounds and sights of the game at the World Cup level, I think that's what kind of sucks a lot of people into the sport, is every 4 years seeing the World Cup and what it means around the world. And it's tough to kind of get that out of your blood once it's in.
It really is the greatest spectacle in sports when it comes down to it. There's nothing better than the World Cup. I mean, there really isn't. So Jeff, can you talk about where your home base is for work? Are you in that new shiny facility over there in Foxborough? Are you working from home remotely because of the pandemic? What's your work situation like?
So at the moment, I am working remotely at home. So up until late 2019, the entire Revolution organization was in a building literally just outside Gillette Stadium. It's right next to the pro shop. There's kind of a little annex building that our entire operation was working out of from a front office perspective. And the team was based out of the locker room inside Gillette Stadium. That's where, the coaches' offices were. That's where the players were all day, every day. It was late 2019. We opened up the new training center kind of out in the back of Gillette Stadium. The team moved over there. Our academy setup moved over there. Revolution 2 moved over there, and with them went our operations, digital, and PR departments. So our marketing department, our ticketing department all stayed in the building where they are. Half the operation moved over into the training facility. Basically anybody who needed to be around the club on a daily basis. People who needed to go out to training, people who needed to interview the players, people who needed to have that interaction all the time. They moved over to the training center to be with the team all the time. But we moved in there late 2019, and obviously we were only working there on a daily basis until March 2020 when the world flipped upside down. And we were working from home exclusively from March until about June when training started back up ahead of the MLS's back tournament. So from June onwards, we were working. It would be a little bit of both. I'd go in. We had to go into the training center every couple of days anyway to get COVID tested. We'd stay there to do what we needed to do, to interview players, to cover training, to do anything like that. And then as soon as we didn't need to be at the training facility, we'd come home. It was basically go there, do what you need to do there, but anytime you can work from home, work from home. So that was really the setup until December when the season ended, and I've been remote since then. So from December when the season ended until now, I've been working remotely at home. In a couple of weeks, when preseason kicks off, we'll go back to that setup where staff will need to go in and get COVID tested. We'll be in the office a couple days a week for 4 or 5 hours to do what we need to do, but otherwise we'll continue to work remotely at home.
Now, you mentioned the MLS's back tournament in there, and I think the MLS deserves a lot more credit for their bubble environment and being able to put that tournament on. And you were down there in the MLS bubble, so can you talk about that experience a little bit? Any fun memories or anything specific that jumps out to you thinking back to your time in the bubble?
Well, the funny, I'll start with the kind of the funny story is we'd get COVID tested either every other day or back-to-back days a lot of the time, depending on how the testing schedule worked out. And we were down there from July 2nd to I think July 26th, and my birthday is July 5th. So I had my birthday right at the beginning of the bubble experience, and every single time we would go in and get COVID tested, you would have to say your name and your birthday to confirm that you were who you were. So almost the entire time we were down there, my birthday had just happened. Every single time I'd sit down to get tested, I'd go, yeah, Jeff Lemieux, July 5th, 1984. And I'd go, oh, happy birthday. Did you do anything fun? I was like, no, I was here. I was in the bubble, so we can't really go anywhere or do anything. So I got my birthday, but literally every day. Oh, your birthday just happened. Did you do anything fun? I got COVID tested. I guess that was the fun thing to do on my birthday. But it's funny, when that tournament was initially kind of unveiled and we heard what it was going to be, and that we were going to be one of the first leagues that was going to go down and try to take on an endeavor like this. And there was just so much uncertainty. No one had really done it yet. NWSL was kind of just getting, they ended up starting their bubble a little bit before we did, but they were still kind of in the planning stages while we were in the planning stages. I know lacrosse had a similar bubble that had started around the same time we did, but when we were talking about all this, we didn't know what it was going to entail. Everything was still a little uncertain and a little scary. So you're kind of thinking, do I want to go down there and do this? What's it going to be like? Is it going to be safe? And then when we got down there, I'll tell you, for the first few days, it was a little choppy because, FC Dallas had all of their issues where they had an outbreak in their team. Nashville ended up having an outbreak in their team. Both of those clubs had to drop out of the tournament. So for the first few days, you were kind of like, is this going to work? But all credit to MLS once they were able to kind of eradicate the situations with FC Dallas and Nashville, who had clearly, contracted COVID at some point outside the bubble and brought it in. Once they were able to kind of contain those situations, the bubble was as safe as it could have possibly been. And everything went off pretty much without a hitch once you got past, kind of the Nashville and FC Dallas situations. And yeah, it really was remarkable because when we started off, there's just so much uncertainty, right? You're just wondering, is this going to work? How is this possibly going to work? But they figured out a way, and without a ton of guidance, because a lot of other leagues came after that, right? NHL had their bubble after that. Basketball had their bubble after that. It was really NWSL, lacrosse, and MLS that kind of set the stage and kind of created a platform for these leagues. They kind of wrote the book on how to do this. So, all credit to everybody who was involved in that setup to get that done without a whole lot of guidance.
Yeah, every sport had its own, mishaps with a bubble environment. I think that was just a given. But yeah, like you said, it was great that the MLS was going to be the first major sport back, at least the first team sport to be back doing that. But moving on to the team for a bit, Jeff, how much did Bruce Arena arriving to the team affect the culture around the club as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, you could tell that it was pretty instantaneous. And I think every new coach, you're going to get that quote unquote new coach bump a little bit regardless, just because that's the nature of sports. Anytime there's a little something new, guys are going to get a little bit of that jolt. But when a guy like Bruce Arena joins your organization and brings the type of reputation and the type of history that he brings, it's impossible for guys to not immediately start thinking that things are going to start heading in a good direction. With Bruce Arena at the helm, a guy who's won 5 MLS Cups, has won Supporter Shields, went the deepest run that the U.S. had in modern times at a World Cup, going to the 2002 World Cup quarterfinal. With him leading the charge, you can kind of back off and say, we trust what Bruce Arena is going to do. Yep. We don't have to worry about whether we're doing things right, whether we're heading in the right direction, anything like that. We know that Bruce Arena is the guy who can get us moving in an upward trajectory. So I think he got a little bit of that new coach bump anyway, and then he brings along his reputation, and it just kind of added to that. And I think it's funny when guys talked about what changed when Bruce Arena came in. To a man, every single player on the team talked about the fact that he treats the players like adults. He basically says, this is when training is. This is when the game is. Make sure you're here on time. Other than that, you're an adult. Make sure that you've got yourself ready to train every day. Make sure that you've got yourself ready for the game on the weekend. He's not trying to control every little aspect of every guy's life. He's not trying to tell them when to eat. He's not trying to tell them what to eat. He's not trying to tell them when to go out and when not to go out. He basically says, you're an adult, and I know that you're going to get yourself ready when you need to be ready. And I think guys at the professional level really appreciated that, and it clearly translated on the field based on how this team turned things around in that 2019 season, from the start that they had to making a playoff run like it did at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I know it's the easy comparison, to Bill Belichick. That's what people like to describe Bruce Arena as. But when I talk to my friends and people that don't know much about the MLS and the Revs, I'm like, you got to understand who Bruce Arena is. This guy is MLS royalty. This guy is MLS Mount Rushmore. So he really has had an incredible impact on the team. And another person that just really changed the team last year was Karlis Hill when he came back. Can you talk about the feeling around the club? In a similar sense to Bruce Arena, when Karlis Hill came back at the end of last season, the team seemed to change. And obviously, I mean, in my opinion, he might be the best number 10 there is in the MLS. But can you talk about what the team was like when Karlis Hill made his return at the end of last season?
Yeah, I mean, look, you would like to build a squad, and I think the Revs have, in a sense, built a squad that doesn't have to, rely on that one guy to make everything click. But when it's a player like Karlis Hill, who so much of the game revolves around, if you take that guy, your best player, your playmaker, the guy who is your engine, who makes everything click, you take him out of that lineup, you're going to be worse. That's just the way that it is. So the Revs, without Karlis Hill for basically the majority of the 2020 season, had to try to find a way to kind of just grind through that 2020 season to get themselves in a position where they could still have a shot once Karlis Hill got back into the squad. And I think when Karlis came back in October, that was the squad that the New England Revolution had planned on having in 2020. You basically didn't really see the real Revs all year because Karlis had missed the entire season, and so much of what the Revs do revolve around him. So when Karlis came back into that squad and they went on that run through the late part of the regular season and then went off in the playoff run to the Eastern Conference Final, that gives everybody so much excitement about what this team can do in 2021 and beyond, because it was really only the end of the regular season and the playoffs when we really feel like we got to see the Revs as they were meant to be constructed in 2020. And you see the impact that Karlis Hill has. It is unbelievable because it's not just what he's the type of player that doesn't just score goals, doesn't just provide assists, doesn't just keep things moving through midfield. He's that player who makes everybody better. When Karlis Hill is on the field, all of the pieces around him are raised a level because the types of passes that he makes, the type of vision that he has makes everybody else around him better. So you're not just getting one of the best number 10s in the league, you're raising the level of the rest of your team once he comes back in the squad. So that's what's got everybody really, really excited about 2021. It's like, all right, well, we saw that playoff run. That was the team. That was the only time we really got to see this team in 2020. Now, hopefully, we're going to get to see them for a full season in 2021.
And speaking of team building in the coming season, are there any new signings that you're particularly excited for, like Mafla, Captum, De La Garza, or even Luis Caicedo coming back too and changing the midfield up?
Yeah, so all of those guys I think are going to have big roles to play in this squad in 2021. The guy I'm most intrigued by is Captum, and mostly just because of his pedigree coming up through the Barcelona system and clearly a player still at 24 years old right now, still a player who's young and kind of coming into his prime. I think the potential that he has to be a game changer in central midfield is really exciting. Christian Mafla, another guy who I haven't had a chance to really see play at all, but who I know, the Revs have been looking for years for someone to come in and kind of lock down that left back role. Basically, since Chris Tierney retired, the Revs have been looking for somebody to come in and fill that spot. So the hope is that Christian Mafla is that guy. He had a tremendous career in Colombia playing with Nacional, and a player who they're hoping can come in and lock down that spot. And yeah, AJ De La Garza, a guy who I've had a chance to interview a couple of times, even though he hasn't joined the team officially for preseason yet. And this is a guy who is just a winner. I mean, we talk about Bruce Arena and kind of the mentality that he brings into the team and having won 3 MLS Cups. AJ De La Garza is one of those guys who was on 3 of those LA Galaxy MLS Cup winning teams. He won multiple national championships in college. He won multiple national titles in his youth days. And I know not all of that necessarily translates, but this is a guy who just knows how to win. And that can be invaluable when you put that type of guy into a locker room that feels like it's on the verge. And you take a Revolution team that was in the Eastern Conference Final last year, and you add some guys like that, Captum, who could be a game changer in midfield, a guy like De La Garza, who is a historical winner. You're hoping that those are the types of pieces that can put you over the top. And I know that Bruce Arena has said that the Reds aren't done adding just yet, or that's the hope at least. Still looking to make one potential starting addition, I think, heading into this offseason or heading into the 2021 season. I think probably still looking for a little bit of depth in central defense as well. You think about Andrew Farrell and Henry Kessler, 2 guys who pretty much locked down that central defensive role, but I think still looking for a little bit of depth beyond them. Beyond Farrell and Kessler, you've got Colin Verfurth and AJ De La Garza, who hasn't really played center back for the last 3 or 4 years. So I think probably still looking for some depth there. But when you think about a team that was on the verge of going to MLS Cup last year, brings back basically all of their major contributors from that 2020 team and adds a couple of pieces and guys like Captum and Mafla and hopefully another potential international addition and guys like De La Garza and Boateng as well. You hope that's what can put this team over the top.
Absolutely. And everyone go check out Jeff's last couple interviews with AJ De La Garza on YouTube. They're awesome on the New England Revs page or on revolutionsoccer.net. Go check out his article talking about De La Garza wearing number 20, his connection with that, and Taylor Twellman. Obviously, Twellman, is all about the Revs history, and it's cool seeing him supporting that. But MLS in general, real quick, Jeff, two questions left. If you were in Don Garber's seat for one day, if you were a commissioner and you had executive power for one day, what would be a league-wide rule change that you'd put in if you had the chance?
Oh, man.
Just one.
I
immediately think of
about
DPs.
this one ahead of time. I don't know. I might have to think about that one for a little longer. I do think what is one thing that I'll go along with because you just mentioned Taylor Twellman, I'll take it in that direction, because we've seen coming off of COVID-19 that leagues around the world had gone to 5 substitutions instead of 3 substitutions, and that was designed because players are coming off these long layoffs. They wanted to make sure that players were going to be physically able to deal with the rigors of playing the game, so they moved it from 3 substitutions to 5 substitutions. And it seems like universally amongst coaches that has been a welcome change, moving from 3 substitutions to 5 substitutions. I know some leagues around the world have moved back to 3 substitutions. I know Bruce Arena has been a vocal proponent of moving to 5 substitutions permanently. Along those lines, I do think that World Soccer, and I would love to see Major League Soccer be at the forefront of it as well, although I know it'll eventually be a FIFA kind of mandate, is the concussion substitution, and making sure that is something that becomes a part of the game overall, because you cannot, in these situations when players have head injuries, you cannot leave it up to the player. You cannot leave it up to the club, because there's just too much at stake with players' livelihoods and careers. So I think to implement a concussion substitution for teams so that they can make the right decisions with regards to player safety. Because you talked about Taylor and that kind of sparked that in my mind, I'll go that direction.
I think that's perfect. I think that's a perfect answer. Obviously, Taylor Twellman's been trying to be at the forefront of that for the past couple of years, and hopefully that is something that the MLS can kind of lead.
The last question for you, Jeff, just a real quick one. Would you mind doing some free consulting and share some advice for 2 22-year-olds trying to break into the world of sports journalism, broadcasting, podcasting, all the above?
Well, I will say, to start, the fact that you've already got this podcast and you're doing this, that you're using your free time on a Sunday morning to just create a sports talk podcast is a pretty darn good start, to be honest, because when I was in college, I wasn't doing anything like this. I had a couple of internships through school where, I worked a little bit for a newspaper, the Cape Cod Times, and I worked for the Cape Cod Crusaders, who are an unfortunately now defunct PDL team at the time. But just in terms of kind of going out myself and, creating a podcast or creating a website or a blog or something like that, you guys are ahead of me. So many people feel like it seems like they're ahead of where I was at that time. So this is a fantastic start. And that's really my major advice is to create a portfolio for yourself where it doesn't matter where your content is going. It doesn't matter where a podcast is living. It doesn't matter where your written content is living, as long as you're working on that content, creating the content, and it can live somewhere. You have a portfolio to be able to show people. So when you're applying for a job, you're able to say, here's this podcast that I've created. Here's this written story that I wrote. Here's this interview that I did. If you have those materials and you can straight up show someone, here's my work, that's the best position you can possibly put yourself in, is to have that portfolio. And in creating that portfolio, the more you conduct interviews, the more you write stories, the more you do anything like that, the more you interview people, the more and more comfortable you get with it, the more you find your voice and kind of what makes sense for you in terms of, finding that written voice can be really difficult, right? Kind of how you want to portray, how you want to tell stories. You only find that by doing it over and over again. So that would be my advice. Make sure that you're writing, make sure that you're conducting interviews, hosting this podcast. Like, this is a great start. So that's my major advice, is basically just build a portfolio. You don't necessarily need to be working for a newspaper or a media outlet or anything to create your own content now. The resources are out there to just go create your own content. You guys are doing that. That's a great start. So yeah, keep going.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the advice, Jeff. And again, thank you for coming on. Now, the interview's over. We'll give you the floor. You can let the people know what you got going on, where they can follow you to get updates on the MLS, Revolution, anything, all of the above.
Yeah, revolutionsoccer.net is where all of our content lives. So get yourself over to revolutionsoccer.net, especially in the coming weeks, because the 2021 MLS preseason will be kicking off within the next couple of weeks, late February, early March. The players will be getting back on the field. ahead of April 17th, which is when the 2021 MLS season will be kicking off. So we are just getting our 2021 season rolling. Exciting times in Major League Soccer. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Lemieux. It's Lemieux. And I tweet mostly about soccer, but I throw in a little bit of Bruins talk in there as well, and some occasional witty banter. No, at least what I think is witty banter, at least in my own mind. But yeah, get yourselves over to RevolutionSoccer.net. We're about to kick off a really exciting season. So yeah, go follow our coverage.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, Jeff. It was a blast having you, getting to talk about you, the Revs, and the MLS. And we really appreciate you taking the time and coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me, guys.